All right, welcome everybody to today's Lunch and Learn. We'll be going over kinetic source control. Hey, I'm Fred Zellhart from CodaBears. Okay, so what is source control? If you're not familiar with source control, it's a repository for code, and that code could be anything that you want to store. So it could be SQL, XML, C#. In Epicore's case, forms and BAQs are stored out as XML files, so it's very convenient to store those as source control. BPM, solutions, all those things can actually be source coded, functions, everything. The advantage of source control is it stores a history. So when you check something in, you've got a point in time for that item. And then if you check it in again, you make some changes, check it in again, there's a difference between what was done, let's say last week, and what you just checked in today. And so you can compare those two different versions and see what changed. That comes in really handy if you put something out and somebody says, hey, this just broke. And you're like, okay, well, what exactly did I change? Because now I can narrow down my debugging to just the items that changed. And this also works great with reports. So your SSRS reports, those are also text. They work great for doing those comparisons. If somebody says, hey, this was working, this field showed up, now it doesn't, you can put it into source control and get those histories so that you can do those changes. Most source control systems will do that comparison between two different versions for you. A lot of them will let you check in multiple files at the same time. So if you've got, let's say, a layer or a classic form, as well as a SQL stored procedure and a report that all go together for a specific change that somebody wanted, you can check them all in, and it's bundled together so that when you go looking at the history, you can say, well, I changed the form, but I also changed these other things. So if you have to make updates to the form, you know that you should probably make updates to those other items as well. The nice part about source control, at least when you're in my world, is you can also roll changes back. So if I've made a change and there was a problem with something, if I need to go back to the previous version so that I can get the system back up and running, for example, I can go back, get that previous version, or roll back my changes and then put them out in production so that everything's back where it was before I move my stuff into production. That's really nice because it gives you a very quick way. If something you find a problem with something that's in production, you can quickly roll back to the previous version that you know was working. So you can get back to that safe margin very quickly. As well, I've had it where I've deployed something to production and somebody else makes a change and doesn't tell me. Because I've got my source control, I can quickly compare what I've got in my source control history, which is what I did, and what is in production. And if there are changes, then I know somebody other than me made those changes. So very quickly I can go, aha, here's the changes that somebody did. I didn't do this because it's not my source control. So therefore, we've got to find out who this rogue person is that's making changes without following proper procedures. So it's very nice to get controls in place. Source control systems have kind of evolved over time. So we started out, if you're familiar with Unix, there was a SCCS, or Source Code Control System, I think is what it stood for. The very early versions with Microsoft, there was Visual Source Safe. Then we branched out into Subversion. Git's a very popular and modern item. Team Foundation also has a source control system in it. And within the past year or so, Kinetic has built in a source control system for Kinetic layers. It's not for everything, but it is for Kinetic layers so that you can quickly roll changes back. And that's what we're going to show you is how do I do that source control in Kinetic. So let's kind of kick off into there. I'm going to log into my Epicore environment. Okay, so we're going to work with Kinetic layers. So the first thing we want to do is get into developer mode. And if you're not familiar with how to do that, this little overflow menu over here, the 3 vertical dots, click on that. And then currently it says developer mode is off. I'm going to click on that. That will turn it on. If I click those 3 dots again, you'll notice developer mode is on. So now I'm just going to click off the screen. So for my example, what I'm going to use is the customer screen. So I'm going to bring up the customer screen. It's in my recents. As well, I could have gone up to the search, typed in customer, brought it up, or navigated the menu. Any of those things work well inside of the Kinetic interface. The search up here for menu items is awesome. If you're not familiar with it, you can just type in things and they start showing up in there. So now I want to get into Application Studio for the customer application, and I want to create a layer for that. So I'm going to click my overflow menu, come down here to Application Studio. Now, if you don't see Application Studio, by the way, this comes up in the version I've got. There's a patch that fixes this specified cast is not valid. I'm on an early version. If you did not see Application Studio when you click that overflow menu, it means you're not in developer mode. So you need to go back to your main menu over here, get into developer mode, and then you'll be okay. Now I'm going to edit my details form. So I'm going to come click on details, click on the edit button, which is this little pencil icon. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want a new layer, and we're going to call this layer Lunch and Learn and do save layer. So now we've got a name for our layer, and I can start making changes. So I'm going to scroll down here, and let's say our company never does any web sales. Why? Yeah, because we're foolish and we don't do the web because we don't think it's good. I don't know. So I want to get rid of this web customer area. We're not going to do the checkbox. We're not going to do this drop down or anything. So I've highlighted that group box that is the web customer. I'm going to come over to properties, and I'm going to come down to state, choose hidden. Now that puppy is gone. Okay. So what I can do at this point is I could save. So I can click the little disk icon and click save. That's fine. And I'm going to, again, wait until this little spinning bar up here goes away. Now it's completely saved. You'll notice when you've got your overflow here, you do have a publish, save as, close all tabs, exit. Publish is what you would do to get it available for a menu item. So you have to publish a layer before it can be chosen on a menu item. But they've also got this little cloud up here. And that little cloud says commit. And the commit is what gets you into source control. So if I click that cloud, I can put in a comment. I'm going to say hid web customer group box. Then I have to click the little commit down here to commit my changes. So in source control, committing means I'm pushing it up to the repository. It's got a version. Once I commit that, over here on my left, I've got a little history over here. So I can click that history and I can see my changes. Here is my committed version, hid customer group box. Okay, now I'm going to close my history. I'm going to go back to my details. Let's say I also wanted to hide my valid payer here. So I'm going to go to my valid payer, click hidden, click my valid sold to, click hidden, and I'm going to commit that change. So now when I commit that, again, I get my little bar spinning, hid top two options for status. Hit commit, that goes away, and I can come over to my history. Now I've got a version 2, hit 2 options for status. So I've got my changes in here. Now, if I'm going to close my history because sometimes when you've got multiple tabs open, things go a little wonky in Application Studio, so I try to keep them limited. I'm going to hit my preview button. Again, I get that specified cast. We're going to just ignore that. Come up here. I'm just going to click on my Ace Brown customer so that I can get into my details. And you'll notice we don't have our ship tos in here and not our ship tos, our web customer and our details. So our valid ship to and our item down here are gone in our preview. Now, if I close this, go back to history, I can roll back my change. So I can come over here, copy. So if I go back to version 1, go to my details, and I click the edit button there. It's just taking a little bit to load it in. Notice my valid payer, valid sold to are back in here, but I still don't have my web customer. And I'm going to wait for my little bar up here to finish loading. Maybe I'll wait for it to finish loading. I might get bored. There we go. Hit my preview. Draft will be overridden. That's fine because now I'm going to lose what I was working on because I'm going back to this version, version 1. So now if I go to Ace Brown, now I've got my valid payer, valid sold to show up. So I can quickly roll back to a previous version if I want to. And if I want to go forward again, I can just come here and view that version. Go to my details, click the edit. Sure, I'll click the edit, just takes a little bit. So now those top 2 items are missing again. So this is a nice way to let you roll back and forward to different versions. So if you're trying something, let's say you've got something at a working state and you don't want to lose your changes, or you're afraid that you're going to make a change that might break something else. You can do this commit, put it into the repository, and then if you make some changes and you're like, oops, I screwed that up, you can go back to that safety net, that previous version, and start over. That's a really nice way to just kind of roll back, get to your safety net, and go forward again. You don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, what did I screw up? Or the ever popular dreaded, I have to start all the way over from scratch. That's what a lot of people do, is if it gets really screwed up, they just start all the way over. And depending on how many changes you've made, that could take up a lot of time. So it's a lot easier to roll back this way. Now, when you publish, you are publishing a specific version. So you want to make sure that when you do the publish, you're on the proper version because that's the version that's going to go into your menu items. Now, you can also do source control if you're not doing Kinetic. If I don't want to use Kinetic's source control, you can export your layers they're XML files, and you can put them into a different type of source control, like Team Foundation or Git, any of those. Alternatively, or in addition, you can also export solutions. So your solutions can go into source control so that you've got a history of what those are. So if you're doing active development, I like to put my things into my solutions as I do them, so I can keep a history of what I added into my solution as well. So always put your layers or your solutions into source control if you're going to have an external source control system. If you're using the Kinetic system, you can do that for layers. Now they might, I don't know if Epicor will do this, but since they've got it for layers, they might do the same thing for BPMs, BAQs, and other things in the future. They've just come out with this, so I don't know how far it will go. So the advantage of doing things outside of Kinetic source control is I can compare versions. So with outside source control systems, I can actually say I want to compare version 1 to version 2. I can see the specific differences. Whereas in Kinetic, what I can do with the layers right now is just roll back. So unless your comments are good, you're not going to know exactly what changed unless it's really obvious. If you make obvious changes, great. So that also brings us to when you do those commits, make your comments good so that you know what you changed. That's going to be your only tracker. So you want to make sure you've got good comments. Don't need to write a book, but you also don't want to just put in there blah and assume somebody's going to do that. So that kind of gets through our Kinetic source control presentation. This feature, I'm not sure if it came out in the last version or the previous version of Kinetic, but it is within the past year there. So it is something that not a lot of people have seen, especially if you're not on the latest version. A lot of people take a little bit of time to upgrade. So you may not have seen this because you're on a couple versions behind, but if you do see it, go ahead.
A question from Brenda. Once published, will the source comments stay with the layer? Would you be able to reopen a published layer and remove or edit one change?
So once it's published, I believe all your committed changes are still there. So if you go to the history, you'll see everything. So even if I go into Application Studio here, let's get that specified cast, I'll try and do a publish. So change layers, go to my Lunch and Learn, edit. If I tell this to publish, publishing, commit, I believe when I go to my history, I'm going to wait for this little bar to finish. See, I've got for version 3, the checkbox is checked, but I've still got my previous 2 versions, and I can still come back to this and go back to the version I was on. So once you publish, you can come back in. You could view your changes on that previous layer. You can make some other edits, and then you could publish that layer. If you're going to make changes and publish again, you might want to change that to a different layer, or it's kind of it's up to you depending on if you're changing to override things or if you're changing in addition to. So you might need to make a second layer, combine the two together, or you might want to keep it all together. That's up to you.
Question from Matthew. I find comments for customizations hard to make specific enough. Is there any sort of built-in change log functionality that would detail the exact changes done to specific fields, like how to change log or how the change log can work if activated for other areas of Epicor?
So right now, Matt, no, there's nothing that identifies things down to that level, strictly because your layers are stored as, you can think of it as a blob. It's a single field in the database for all that XML. So it's not like individual things are broken out and they're tracking the individual XML. They just kind of store the layer. That's it. If you use an external source control system, you'd be able to do a compare and you could see the specific changes. So that's a good thing about the external. The bad thing is it's not built into Epicor, so you have to remember to keep exporting things every time you want to put them into source control.
And then another question from Mickey. Do you still need to go to maintenance to actual load / make the new layer live?
Yes, you'd still need to, when you publish, that makes those changes available on the menu. So I believe once you've published it and assigned a menu item, you'll be okay. But if you want to roll back and republish, then I don't think you have to, because once you publish, I think it's active on the menu. So if you publish multiple times, I think it always takes the most recent published. All right, any other questions? I'm not seeing anything else come in. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you attending Lunch and Learn, and we hope to see you again.
Want more Coda Bears Lunch and Learn? Check out our channel for more videos.